created. For example, both of these are true, and they together imply that my sister does not exist. If my sister exists in any circumstances at all, then she will sin. And if my sister exists in any circumstances at all, then she will not sin. So God better not know all of these material conditionals before he's decided what to create, or he'd know exactly which creatures are not going to be created. Could some special subset of the material conditionals be available to God prior to his creative decisions? There would have to be enough material conditionals about me, for example, to enable God to know what will happen if he creates me, but not enough to imply that my merely possible sister, not enough conditionals of this sort about my merely possible sister, for God to know that she won't exist. Which of the many material conditionals about my sister will God know at the first stage? I suppose a defender of the proposed peeking ahead mode of acquiring extra foreknowledge could imagine that a random assortment of the true conditionals about my sister is somehow selected and made available at the first stage. While in my case, because I'm actually going to exist, God knows the full spectrum of true material conditionals about me. But there's something very strange about this idea, that in deciding whether to create my sister, God makes use of the fact that if my sister will be created and offered a bribe, she will freely take it. But God does not make use of the fact that if my sister will be created and offered a bribe, she will not freely take it, even though they're both true. After all, both are, by hypothesis, true, and true for the same reason, namely the falsity of the antecedent. God's using just one of the two in these circumstances seems to me to put God in an absurd situation. It would be closely analogous to the following scenario. Suppose that, unbeknownst to me, there are neither subjunctive nor counterfactual truths about whether I would arrive at the airport on time if I took the low road or the high road. I guess the low road is Route 1 and the high road is the New Jersey Turnpike. Perhaps quantum indeterminacy, that would explain a lot about the New Jersey Turnpike, leaves it radically undetermined whether I arrive early or late, no matter which route I take. Now suppose I'm told by some trusted authority that the following material conditionals are true. If I take the low road, I will arrive late. And if I take the high road, I will arrive late. On the basis of this information, I decide to call the airline, tell them that I won't make the flight, and try to arrange for a later one. Would I feel cheated to learn that it was not true that if I had taken the low road, I would have been late? Nor was it true that if I had taken the high road, I would have been late, and that the material conditionals that I was fed by this authority were true in virtue of the falsity of their antecedents, in virtue of the fact that I wasn't going to take either one. You bet I would. But if God knows randomly chosen material conditionals about my merely possible sister, and they figure among his reasons for not creating her, and if there are no subjunctives or counterfactuals to back them up, then God will know at the next stage that he was making decisions upon precisely this sort of basis. God was tricked. That's wrong. That's just wrong. So God's peeking ahead of some of our free choices to acquire information about events explanatorily downstream of those choices leads either to the truth of some Molinistic conditionals of freedom or to this sort of absurdity. This result helps explain why Molinism is so important to both friends of foreknowledge and timeless knowledge, although I haven't spun that out. But I think the story of stages in timeless knowledge has got to go roughly the same. Without Molinism, foreknowledge and timeless knowledge still imply a risky view of providence, and, this conclusion is a little too strong. It implies a risky view of providence that the simple foreknowledge people will agree. Furthermore, the advantage, the providential advantage that simple foreknowledge gives is not nearly as great as some of the advocates of simple foreknowledge have thought. Thank you.
All right, let's move on then to the commentary from Donald Smith.
Echoing a comment from David Vanderlaan yesterday, I'm in a tight spot. I was a former student of Dean's. I was a former student of Al's. Dean likes open theism. Al likes Molinism. I'm not even sure I'm allowed to defend simple foreknowledge without my PhD being revoked, which Al used to threaten me with. I've escaped the 5 years. I suppose I'll break ranks and do my best to defend simple foreknowledge against Dean's very interesting and forceful argument. Dean's paper raises, there's a handout for my paper. I'm sorry that the paper isn't available. That's my fault. I failed to send it along at the proper time. But I'll try to alert you when we're at the relevant part of the handout. Dean's paper raises many interesting questions about how foreknowledge, explanatory priority, defined decision-making, and providence interact. And the main argument of his paper is both forceful and significant. It's significant, at least in part, because it threatens to squeeze out any middle course between open theism and Molinism, a course which simple foreknowledge is supposed to navigate. In what follows, I'll do my best to help simple foreknowledge avoid Dean's squeeze, but no promises. Let simple foreknowledge denote the thesis that God has complete foreknowledge, but no middle knowledge. That is, no knowledge about subjunctive conditionals of freedom or of any other indeterministic outcomes. The main conclusion for which Dean argues is that simple foreknowledge entails a risky view of divine providence. And we should note at the outset that for Dean's purposes, a risky view of providence is a view according to which neither foreknowledge nor middle knowledge informs God's decision to create a world with free creatures. I'll follow Dean in assuming that libertarianism is true, that complete foreknowledge is compatible with human freedom, and that God exists in time. I'll put Dean's argument in terms of God's decision, D, to create a universe leading up to free creaturely choices. And here is a very stripped down, very bare bones version of Dean's argument. This is on your handout. 1, if simple foreknowledge is true and D is not risky, then there's an explanatory circle involving D, a circle such as God deciding upon D because he knows that he'll decide upon D because, well, he decides upon D. 2, there can't be an explanatory circle involving D. That would entail kind of irrationality on God's part. Therefore, 3, if simple foreknowledge is true, then D is risky. And so a risky view of divine providence is true. I'll try out 2 lines of defense on behalf of simple foreknowledge. The first defense questions 1. Suppose a proponent of simple foreknowledge says the following, which is on your handout. God's deciding upon D could very well have been informed by, and so explained in part by, God's knowing something like this. We were all going to freely meet to honor Al today. I know that's not the example on your handout. At T-star. So if this were so, and we ever had the chance to ask God why he made the universe the way he did, he would answer in part by saying that he knew from all time past that we were going to freely meet to honor Al at T-star. Now God's deciding upon D is distinct from his acting upon D. Suppose the time T for God to act upon D becomes present. God acts upon it, and in part for the reason that God knew all along that we were going to freely meet to honor Al at T-star. Later, T-star becomes present. We freely meet. God knows that we're freely meeting. And God's having acted upon D at T is part of the causal history of God's knowing that we're freely meeting. Now, if 1 is true, then that little story must contain some explanatory circle. And it might, but it's not entirely clear to me that it does. And so this can be considered as an invitation to draw out a circle if, in fact, there is one. Okay. Here's one way that someone might try to tease out an explanatory loop in that circle. Someone might say that the story entails the following 2 claims. A, when T becomes present, God's acting upon D is explained in part by God's knowing that we'll freely meet at T-star. B, when T-star becomes present, God's knowing that we're freely meeting is explained in part by God's having acted upon D at T. And then someone might maintain that A and B entail C. When T becomes present, God's acting upon D is explained in part by God's having acted upon D at T. And I'll concede that that's a problem, or at least an explanatory loop. But it seems to me there are 2 ways a proponent of simple foreknowledge might resist the claim that A and B entail C. First, he can say that